Hi, class. Welcome back to Comparative Politics. We're still talking about the state, and this is part 3 of the lecture. So if you have any confusion, you can see the slide. We are in comparative politics. We're talking about the state. So chapter 2 by Patrick O'Neill refer to that, and they go into various things that are happening within states. So we looked at the theories in part 2. We looked at, the fact that states use force to maintain sovereignty, or they use co-option. We looked at all of that, okay? So let's look a little bit about what kind of things happen within. So we always hear the term about overthrowing regimes, right? What are regimes? So Patrick O'Neill is basically saying that regimes are not what you think they are. They're not the government. When you say overthrowing regimes, you mean something specifically different than overthrowing just one government. It means you overthrew a set of rules and norms about politics. So regimes are essentially a set of rules and norms about politics, okay? So overthrowing a regime usually means getting rid of the entire system, kind of. So you might have a communist regime because you saw consistency not just in one government, but successive governments. They're all following communism, and they all have particular sets of rules and norms. Norms meaning values, okay? So they form this system, and every successive government keeps this system going. So that's a regime, according to Patrick O'Neill, okay? So when you overthrow the regime, it means you've overhauled the entire system. You're changing it completely, but you didn't go through a civil war all the time. Sometimes it can be through some change that happens within the system, okay? Without engaging in violence. So Patrick O'Neill says regime is actually something bigger than a government. If a set of values and practices are consistent in successive elective governments, they represent a regime, okay? So the next thing he says is, how are you going to understand if it's a regime or if it's different kinds of just governments doing their own things? So he says, look for a consistent pattern. Do you see same kind of power sharing system, same kind of ideologies? That's a regime. In contrast, government is different. It is not bound by ideologies and power sharing practices, meaning it's not continuing some old regime. Types of leaders. He also says there's different types of leaders. So he again here is saying legitimacy requires coercion and consent. See, talking like Gramsci, right? So he says there's three kinds of legitimacy. One is traditional legitimacy. So your claim to power comes from tradition, custom, age-old practices. Traditionally, we say this is the, when you look at monarchies, that's about traditional legitimacy. Okay, but when you look at people that came to power because they were charismatic, we say the person has charismatic legitimacy. So charismatic personality might be somebody who their personality is so charming that they rose to power. But if they rose to power because their father was the monarch, then that's traditional legitimacy. Finally, we say precedence in a democracy. The system is elections. People elect the next leader, and that's our form of government. So it is a rational legal legitimacy. Here, rule of law is important, not who your father was, not what your personality alone is alike, right? Of course, personality matters in elections. All right, so let's actually stop here. There's way too much going on in the book. Some of it is not very useful. So I'm going to stop here. As far as the quiz for two is concerned, we're going to go with what we have here.